Secretary Chris Grayling.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to make a statement about the proposed expansion of Heathrow Airport. This government has a clear vision to build a Britain that is fit for the future, a Britain with a prosperous jobs market and an economy that works for everyone. That is why I come to this House to mark a historic moment. Today I am laying before Parliament our final proposal for an airports national policy statement, which signals our commitment to securing global connectivity, creating tens of thousands of local jobs and apprenticeships, and boosting our economy for future generations by expanding Heathrow Airport. It is an example of how this government is taking forward its industrial strategy. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know that taking such a decision is never easy. This issue has been debated for half a century. My department has met with local residents and fully understands their strength of feeling. But this is a decision taken in the national interest and based on detailed evidence. In 2015, the Independent Airports Commission concluded that a new northwest runway at Heathrow was the best scheme to deliver additional capacity. And in October 2016, we agreed. We ran 2 national consultations during 2017 and received more than 80,000 responses. All the points raised have been carefully considered, and today we are publishing the government's response. To ensure fairness and transparency, we appointed an independent consultation advisor, the former Court of Appeal Judge Sir Jeremy Sullivan. Our draft MPS was scrutinised by the Transport Committee, and I'd like very much to thank the chair of that committee and her team on that committee for all the work they did, the thoroughness of that work. And I'm very pleased that they, like me and my colleagues in government, accepted the case for expansion and concluded that we are right to pursue development through an additional runway at Heathrow. We welcome and have acted upon 24 out of 25 of their recommendations. Our response to the committee is also being published today. Mr. Speaker, this country has one of the largest aviation sectors in the world, contributing £22 billion to our GDP, supporting 500,000 jobs, servicing 285 million passengers and transporting 2.6 million tonnes of freight last year. The time for action is now. Heathrow is already full, and the evidence shows the remaining London airports won't be far behind. Despite being the busiest 2-runway airport in the world, Heathrow's capacity constraints means it is falling behind its global competitors, impacting the UK's economy and global trading opportunities. Expansion at Heathrow will bring real benefits across the country, including a boost of up to £74 billion to passengers and the wider economy, providing better connections to growing world markets and increasing flights to more long-haul destinations. Heathrow is a nationally significant freight hub, carrying more freight by value than all other UK airports combined. A 3rd runway would enable it to nearly double its current freight capacity. In addition, Mr. Speaker, and this is really crucial, this is a project with benefits that reach far beyond London. We expect and intend up to 15% of slots from a new runway to facilitate domestic connections across the United Kingdom, spreading the benefits of expansion to our great nations and regions. As well as new routes, I would expect there to be increased competition on existing routes, giving greater choice to passengers. And I'd say very clearly, the regional connectivity to me is one of the key reasons for the decision that we have taken. Now, I recognise the strong convictions many members of this House and their constituents have on this issue, and the impact on those living in the local area. It is for this reason we've included strong mitigations in the MPS to limit these impacts. Communities will be supported by up to £2.6 billion towards compensation, noise insulation and improvements to public amenities, 10 times bigger than under the 2009 3rd runway proposal. This package is comparable to some of the most generous in the world and includes £700 million for noise insulation for homes, £40 million to insulate schools and community buildings. The airport has offered 125% of the full market value for homes in the compulsory and voluntary purchase zones, plus stamp duty, moving costs and legal fees, as well as a legally binding noise envelope and more predictable periods of respite. For the first time ever, we expect and intend to deliver a 6.5-hour ban on scheduled night flights. But my ambitions do not stop there. If this House agrees and the MPS is designated and the scheme progresses, I will be encouraging Heathrow and airlines to work with local communities to propose longer periods of respite during a further consultation on night flight restrictions. We will only grant development consent Mr. Speaker, if we are satisfied that a new runway would not impact the UK's compliance with air quality obligations. Advances in technology also mean new planes are cleaner, greener and quieter than the ones they're replacing. Earlier this year, a community engagement board was established and we appointed Rachel Safontine as its independent chair. It will focus on building relations between Heathrow and its communities, considering the design of the Community Compensation Fund, which could be worth up to £50 million a year, and also holding the airport to account when it comes to delivering on its commitments today and into the future. Mr. Speaker, there's been much debate about the cost of this scheme. Our position on this could not be clearer. Expansion will be privately financed. But also, again crucially, Mr. Speaker, expansion must also remain affordable to consumers. We took a firm step when I asked the industry regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority, to ensure the scheme remains affordable while meeting the needs of current and future passengers. This process has already borne fruit with the identification of potential savings of up to £2.5 billion. I'm confident that process can and should continue, that further cost savings can be identified, and that the design of the expansion can continue to evolve to better reflect the needs of consumers. That's why I have recommissioned the Civil Aviation Authority to continue to work with industry to deliver the ambition I set out in 2016 to keep landing charges at or close to current levels. This will include gateway reviews, independent scrutiny and benchmarking proposals, which I know are of paramount importance to British Airways, to Virgin Atlantic and the wider airline community. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about scheme delivery and ownership. The North West Runway scheme put forward by Heathrow was selected by the government following a rigorous process. Since then, Heathrow has continued to make strong progress, having already consulted on their scheme design and airspace principles earlier this year. Some stakeholders suggested that we should now look again at who delivers expansion. Whilst I and we will always retain an open mind, my current assessment is that caution is needed at this stage. Heathrow is an operational airport under a single management, and I'm clear that they are currently the only credible promoter who could deliver this transformational scheme in its entirety. I welcome the Civil Aviation Authority's April consultation, which expects Heathrow to engage in good faith with third parties to ensure expansion is delivered in a way which benefits the consumer. However, this also needs to be balanced against the need for timely delivery, and that is why my department will be working closely with Heathrow to enable delivery of the new runway by their current target date of 2026. Heathrow is already, Mr. Speaker, Britain's best connected airport by road and rail. This will be further strengthened by future improvements to the Piccadilly line, new links to Heathrow through Crossrail, connections to HS2 via an interchange at Old Common, and plans for Western and Southern rail access to the airport. I met on the 24th of April, Mr. Speaker, with industry and financial backers who can potentially come forward with plans to deliver that new Southern rail access to the airport. Even with today's announcement, Mr. Speaker, a new operational runway at Heathrow is still a number of years away. The Airports Commission recommended that there would also be a need for other airports to make more intensive use of their existing infrastructure, and we consulted on this in the Aviation Strategy Call for Evidence last year. So I'd like also today, apart from Heathrow, Mr. Speaker, to confirm that the Government is supportive of other airports making best use of their existing runways. However, we recognise that the development of airports can have negative as well as positive local impacts, including on noise levels. We therefore consider that any proposals should be judged on their individual merits by the appropriate planning authority, taking careful account of all relevant considerations, particularly economic and environmental impacts. Furthermore, in April, we set out our next steps, which will see us work closely with industry, business, consumer and environmental groups to develop an aviation strategy that sets out the long-term policy direction for aviation to 2050 and beyond, while addressing the changing needs and expectations of passengers. It will set out a framework for future sustainable growth across the United Kingdom, how we plan to manage our congested airspace, how we plan to use innovative technology to deliver cleaner, quieter, quicker journeys for the benefit of passengers and communities. Airspace modernisation, Mr. Speaker, has to be taken forward irrespective of the decision on the proposed new runway. And to do so, we will expect multiple airports across the south of England to bring forward consultations on their own proposals on how to manage the airspace around their locations. Now, Mr. Speaker, returning to Heathrow, the planning system involves two separate processes. One to set the policy, effectively outline planning consent, which is our MPS, and then if this House votes in favour of it, and it is then designated, a second process for securing the detailed development consent the airport will require. So the next steps would therefore be for Heathrow to develop their plans, including details of the scheme design and airspace change, hold a further consultation to allow public a further say on the next phase of Heathrow's plans, and additional opportunities for the public to have their voices heard. Any application for development consent will of course be considered carefully and with an open mind based on the evidence provided. The process includes a public examination by the Independent Planning Inspectorate before a final decision is made. Now, Mr. Speaker, alongside the MPS today, I have published a comprehensive package of materials that I hope and believe will enable members of this House to make an informed decision ahead of the vote. It's a very comprehensive package, Mr. Speaker. I hope it will provide answers to the questions that members will have. But, Mr. Speaker, I hope the scheme and members in this House will feel that the scheme is crucial to our national interest, that we need to work together to deliver it in order to create what I believe is an absolutely vital legacy for the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, I hope members across the House will get behind this plan, support this nationally strategically important project, and I commend this statement to the House.
Mr. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for advance notice of his statement. I'm grateful. Today's statement has been a long time coming. We've had 11 years of consultation and 9 years since expansion was given the green light. The Secretary of State came to the House yesterday to explain the calamitous implementation of new rail timetables, and the Secretary of State now stands here today at the dispatch box and expects this House to accept what he says about the most significant of infrastructure projects. I'm sorry, but the Secretary of State has form. The only reason that he's at the dispatch box today is because the Prime Minister is too weak to sack him. I regret that the Secretary of State simply doesn't enjoy the confidence of this House. Well, members opposite are complaining, but I didn't hear them shouting their support yesterday. The loudest criticisms came from those benches opposite. Mr. Speaker, Labour will consider proposed expansion through the framework of our well-established 4 tests. Expansion should only happen if it can effectively deliver on the capacity demands, if noise and air quality issues are fully addressed, if the UK's climate change obligations are met in their entirety, and that growth across the country is supported. We owe it to future generations to get all of these factors absolutely right. But if the correct balance isn't found, then the law courts will quite rightly intervene. Mr. Speaker, I wish to commend the superb work of the Chair and the members of the Cross-Party Transport Select Committee. Their report into the Airport National Policy Statement, published in March, left no stone unturned. Its support for approving the NPS is explicitly conditional upon 25 recommendations being addressed. The Secretary of State says he has acted upon 24 of the 25 recommendations. What does that mean? Are they going to be conditions or simply aspirations and expectations? For example, the committee concluded there is a high risk of the NPS breaching air quality compliance. Furthermore, the Department for Transport hasn't published a comprehensive surface access assessment, so it's impossible to demonstrate that the target of no more airport-related traffic can be met. His statement today takes this no further forward. The committee highlighted there is almost no mention of potential cost and investment risk. What guarantees can the government provide that the high-cost risks won't end up covered by the public purse? How can the business case for expansion ensure passenger benefits are met? He says he'll keep charges close to current levels. What sort of assurance is that? Further uncertainties in the NPS as originally drawn remain around the noise analysis and the flight path modelling. It remains whether the revised NPS adequately addresses these and other issues. He says he will encourage Heathrow to work with communities about longer respite periods. What teeth are there in any of those proposals or promises? He claims about the benefits of new technologies, and that they have to be based on real evidence and not some fanciful expectation of future advances. Some of us haven't forgotten his empty promises on dual-fuel trains, which he was told didn't exist. He says he intends and expects 15% of slots for domestic connections. How will that be secured? Intentions, expectations and encouragements are simply not enough. Mr Speaker, it's imperative that the Government provide guarantees to this House that the recommendations and conditions established by the Transport Select Committee are embedded into the revised NPS. Yesterday reminded members across the House that the assurances that the Secretary of State gives are anything but cast iron. It's absolutely essential that the Government embeds the recommendation of the Select Committee within its revision. And I would remind the House that the Transport Select Committee are saying very clearly that the planning process should only move to the next stage if their concerns, as detailed in their excellent report, are properly addressed by the Government in the final NPS. It is our task, Mr Speaker, to scrutinise the revised NPS in the coming days in full detail. Labour will faithfully follow our framework tests and follow the evidence across the 25 recommendations. We will not rely on the assurances of the Secretary of State for Transport, whose assurances are sadly not worth the Hansard they are printed on. Thank you.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think you'll agree with that was a rather disappointing response. The one thing that the Shadow Secretary of State didn't say was whether or not he actually supported the expansion of Heathrow Airport. I happen to believe this is strategically the right thing for our country, the right thing for business, for jobs. And can I say that I very much welcome the positive encouragement that I've received from members across this House in the last few months. I regard this project as being of vital importance to members of Parliament in the north of England, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, in Scotland and in the South West, where actually I see the links to Newquay Airport as being one of the real opportunities for this. Now, Mr Speaker, he raised a number of detailed points. There is a huge amount of material, thousands of pages of material, which he and others can read through. Let me just pick up a few of the items he raised. He mentioned the issue of air quality. This runway cannot be opened if it does not meet air quality rules. But I've been very clear all along, Mr Speaker, that the air quality issue around Heathrow is much more than an issue of the airport itself. It is typical of the air quality issues that face metropolitan areas in this country and elsewhere in the world. And that's why my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, has brought forward an air quality plan. But in addition to that, Heathrow Airport itself is consulting on a low emission zone, which would make it impossible or without a substantial charge to bring a higher emission vehicle into the airport when the runway opens, assuming Parliament and the development process go according to plan. So this is something that has to be addressed. It's not an optional extra for the airport. It has to happen. He made the point about night flights. That has to be and will be put in as a planning condition in this. He raised the question about what happens to the recommendations from the Select Committee. Around half of them will be embedded in the NPS. The remaining half either happen at the DCO stage or they are requirements for the Civil Aviation Authority to follow up and deliver those. We've accepted those recommendations. We will follow faithfully the wishes of the Select Committee to make sure that its recommendations are properly addressed at each stage of the process. But as I said earlier, Mr Speaker, this is a multi-stage process. The Committee's recommendations referred not simply to the NPS, but also to the subsequent stages that take place. He raised the question about landing charges. Landing charges, of course, are regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority. And I've been very clear that landing charges have to stay at or pretty much at current levels in real terms. What this cannot be is an excuse for the airport to hike substantially its landing charges. That would not work for consumers, and it would not work for our economy. Equally, the commitments made on night flights have to be addressed. This project will not have credibility if promises like that to the local community are not properly fulfilled. He raised the questions about the investability. We've had the investability independently assured. We've had the delivery dates independently assured. I've also talked to Heathrow shareholders who have emphasised to me their commitment to this project. So I am absolutely of the view that this is a project that can and will be delivered. You simply have to look, Mr. Speaker, at the price at which slots at Heathrow Airport sell on the open market to realise that this is one of the world's premier airports. It's enormously attractive to international airlines to fly to and from, and that expanding the route network from it will deliver jobs all around this country. And that's, I think, the most important thing for everyone in this House to bear in mind. Whether you are in Scotland, whether you're in the north of England, whether you're in the southwest, whether you're in Wales, whether you're in Northern Ireland. And actually, we shouldn't forget also our Crown dependencies and Gibraltar in this, that also depend on air links to the United Kingdom. This is a way of making sure that our citizens, the people we represent, the businesses they work in, have access to the strategic routes for the future that they will need in the post-Brexit world. And if we are going to be a successful nation in the post-Brexit world, we are going to need advances like this that make a real difference to the future of this country. And that is why I'm disappointed the party opposite hasn't said in principle it supports this. I do. I know members in all parts of this House do. And what we'll be working to do over the next couple of weeks, or however long it takes, we've got 21 sitting days before the deadline for the vote, but we'll have a vote in the coming days, and in the time ahead I will happily talk to parliamentary colleagues about the detail. My officials will do so, and I hopefully will reassure anyone with doubts that this is the right project for the country.
Yes. Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Can I very much welcome the announcement that my right honourable friend has made. When the coalition governments asked Howard Davis to do the report was done in a very comprehensive manner, and this is what the Secretary of State has acted on. Can he, however, say a little more about how he will ensure that the costs are properly controlled? Because he is absolutely right to say that at the end of the day, Heathrow have now got this great opportunity of development which they wanted, but they've got to do it at reasonable costs, and costs that do not put an ever-growing pressure on the operators and also the passengers.
Mr. Speaker, this, of course, is an absolutely crucial point. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It's particularly obviously a matter of great importance to the airlines who don't want to see fares rise, and nor do we. This should be an airport that leads to more choice for passengers and more competition, and therefore lower fares for passengers. Actually, one of the benefits of expanding the networks within the United Kingdom is we need more operators flying within the United Kingdom, in my view, to provide better competition on routes into Heathrow. What I would say to him is that I have statutory powers which I have already used on 2 occasions now to empower the Civil Aviation Authority to monitor costs of the project, to make sure they are driven down. I've just recently renewed those powers, and I will continue to do so where necessary.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to thank the Secretary of State for early sight of his statement. Mr. Speaker, clearly airport expansion has been another polarising issue, and to be fair, the process and some of the UK government's approach in the past and delaying tactics hasn't helped matters, but I do welcome the progress that's getting made, and I welcome the fact that a vote appears to be imminent. Heathrow expansion is a recommended option from the Airports Commission, and it's also a decision, as we've heard, has been backed by the Transport Select Committee, and I too would like to pay tribute to the work they've done in scrutinising the NPS. Now, to be fair, Heathrow have engaged fully with the Scottish Government. They've signed a memorandum of understanding about commitments to Scotland. This includes a construction logistics hub, which from a selfish constituency perspective I would like to see based at Prestwick Airport. They've also committed to a £10 million route development fund and a commitment to promote Scotland going forward. Now, I must be honest, initially supporting Heathrow was counterintuitive for myself initially from a Scottish perspective. But engaging in the Scottish airports, all but one actually support expansion at Heathrow. The various Scottish Chambers of Commerce all support expansion at Heathrow as well, because they recognise the business benefits it can actually bring to Scotland, including up to 16,000 new jobs. So that helps me myself, and clearly this has also got the support of the Scottish Government who have reiterated their support. However, in terms of the statement, the Secretary of State talks about the benefits to nations and regions, and that the expected 15% of slots, the new runway to facilitate domestic connections across the UK. He's still not clarified how he will ensure this will happen. Will conditions be imposed, and will he consider Scotland's needs in terms of these additional slots? Also, how will he ensure that proposals for Heathrow will actually grow passenger numbers in Scottish airports? He said he's recommissioned the CAA to work with industry to keep charges close to current levels, but again, I don't think there's enough clarity provided on how there's going to be certainty on future charges being kept under control. Also, what happens going forward if Heathrow cannot commit to longer respite periods is just thrown into the mix in this statement? And what will we do to ensure greater transparency in new flight paths? Finally, Mr Speaker, given the UK Government's failures to date and defeats in courts in terms of air quality, what will be done to ensure air quality impact assessments are actually robust, and also the correct control measures are put in place going forward as well?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I start by saying I'm very grateful to the Scottish Government and the SNP for their support in this. I do think that it's really important that we ensure that Scotland is well served by the expansion of Heathrow Airport, and I think, as he's understood with the support that's been provided from the Scottish regional airports and from the Scottish business community, that by actually providing more strategic routes to the United Kingdom from Heathrow, we actually provide links to important new developing markets around the world, Mr Speaker. And so I'm very grateful to him for that support. In terms of protection of slots, we're working through the best mechanism. It looks likely, Mr Speaker, as if the public service obligation mechanism may be the best way of doing it. But I'm absolutely clear, I want the most robust legal mechanism by the time we get to the DCO process to protect the allocation of slots to regional connections in the United Kingdom. I do not want and will not accept a situation where slots somehow disappear and get allocated to a long-haul route rather than a UK one. It has to be a project that benefits the whole United Kingdom. In terms of passenger numbers, our forecasts show that all regional airports, virtually all regional airports, will continue to grow. So you'll see growth, in my view, at Scottish airports as well as on routes to Heathrow and from Heathrow as well. He asked about the setting of charges. The Civil Aviation Authority sets the charges. It has absolute regulatory power to set the appropriate level of charges for the airport, so it has the teeth it needs to deliver that at the moment. He asked about the respite issue. I mean, I'm absolutely clear, Mr Speaker, that the night flight ban is an absolute requirement. The only circumstance in which we would look again at that is if the airport and the local community has agreed on doing something differently. But it would only come with the agreement of local communities coming back to us with the airport saying we'd like to do something slightly different. I'm absolutely clear the night flight ban is a non-negotiable part of this from the government's point of view. And finally, he asked about the courts. Look, Mr Speaker, I think it is highly likely, given the fact that there are opponents of this scheme, that this will be challenged in the courts. We have done exhaustive work. There is a huge amount of material for this House to consider. We are following a statutory process, and this can only go ahead if there is a supportive vote in the House of Commons. And I hope that is enough to set this project on the right path.
Justine Greening.
This decision is not only wrong for the UK and its competitiveness, it's wrong for London communities who will be blighted by the pollution from an expanded Heathrow. The Secretary of State says that the runway cannot be opened unless air quality conditions are met. But can he confirm that given in the Heathrow Airport Limited Statement of Principles that there is a cost recovery clause for Heathrow in the event that the project does not proceed after this decision, that this could mean taxpayers have to pick up a bill that costs billions and billions of pounds?
Yeah. Good question.
Well, Mr Speaker, this project cannot pass the development consent order stage unless the airport can demonstrate that it will meet air quality guidelines. So it's absolutely clear. The airport knows this. We've been very clear. This is why they're consulting on the potential of a low emission zone around the airport. But the whole point about air quality is that this is a broader problem for London and other cities that will need to be dealt with well before we get to 2026, and that's why the government's brought forward its air quality proposals, and that's why we are determined to see changes in our society that tackles the air quality issue.
Lillian Greenwood.
I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and his acceptance of the points the Transport Select Committee made in our report. We look forward to examining the detail in the final MPS. We said that an expanded Heathrow must deliver for the whole of the UK, not just the south east of England. Can he explain how public service obligations can guarantee that a new runway will result in more domestic routes and that they're fairly distributed across the regions and nations of the UK? And can he say how this fits with his department's plans for high-speed rail connectivity for cities in the Midlands and the North?
Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly on that latter point, I think we'll need both, to be frank. Creating a rapid link between our great cities, I think, is a necessary part of doing business domestically. It will provide connectivity to airports as well. But I think that the real benefit to expanding this runway is of the linkage that comes from being able to fly from Edinburgh to Heathrow to Shanghai, for example, if a direct flight is not available. And the reality is, from a regional airport, often the local market will simply not be big enough to deliver that direct route. In terms of how we use the PSO process, we will put in place the strongest possible measures to ring-fence those slots. We will make sure that they cannot simply be taken away. That should mean that those slots have to be provided at an affordable level for UK domestic aviation. That is, again, very important. But as we do on some key routes already, if there are strategically necessary routes for the United Kingdom that require PSO support financially, then this government, and indeed future governments, I have no doubt, will wish to make sure those routes are provided for as well.
Mr. Damien Green.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on pushing through a decision which probably should have been made 10 years ago? Does he agree with me that to gain both the economic and full environmental benefits of this decision will require a significant increase in the rail links into Heathrow, not just the ones already planned, but some that are still some way off? And could he expand some more on what he said in his statement about the new rail lines that are being planned from different parts of the country so that people have proper public transport access to what will be a hugely expanding airport?
Well, I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend and thank him for his supportive comments. If you look at the mix of rail service, I think we'll service this new runway if Parliament gives it the go-ahead. In the short term, clearly we will see the arrival of Crossrail services and the upgrade for the Piccadilly line. We will also see the opening of the HS2 station at Old Oak Common. We have in the investment plans for Control Period 6 planned funding to develop the Western Rail access into Heathrow for connections to Reading and the West Country. We are in the process of discussing with private sector investors proposals for the Southern Rail access, which will connect the South Western Rail networks into Heathrow Airport. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we are beginning work on an option that would take very relevant to you, Mr. Speaker, take the Chiltern line into Old Oak Common. There is already a line that connects into Chiltern, and as we see more developments on the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, that will provide an additional route into Heathrow from that important growth area. So I think this is a pretty holistic package of planned rail improvements, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Vincent Cable.
How does the Secretary of State reconcile his claims about regional connectivity with the fact that Heathrow expansion is opposed by all the largest regional airports in Edinburgh, Manchester, Birmingham, East Midlands, Bristol, as well as those in the South East, Stansted and Gatwick? And since these communities are represented by people from different parties, would he agree that it would be appropriate to have a free vote on the NPS when it's put before Parliament?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's clearly up to every individual party to decide how they approach this vote. But what I'd say to him is my experience is not what he's just communicated to me. My experience is that actually around the United Kingdom there is huge support from regional airports and crucially regional business groups for the expansion of Heathrow Airport. We've looked at the projections going forward. They show growth at all of our regional airports, virtually of all of our regional airports. But I don't have the sense of opposition from the regional airports he's describing.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, in welcoming my honourable friend's statement and without wishing to compromise my right honourable friend in any decisions that he may have to take in the future, I can't help noticing that he's indicated very clearly that it will take some years for there to be wheels on tarmac at a new runway at Heathrow. That in the interim we have to make the use of the best use of existing runway capacity. So in that context and post-Brexit, I hope that the government will look favourably upon maximising the use of available existing runways in Kent.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm obviously well aware of my right honourable friend's interest in these issues. I look forward with interest to seeing any proposals that come forward.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can the Secretary of State say that the cost of expansion will not fall on either taxpayers or airline passengers when the airport and airlines are not prepared to fund the essential transport infrastructure around Heathrow that are needed to address the air quality and appalling traffic congestion we already have? And also the fact that the Transport Committee report this in March found that the environmental impacts on London and the South East have not been fully monetised and need to be addressed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as she will find when she reads the updated MPS document, that latter point is one of the several recommendations from the committee that we've addressed and added additional information into the MPS. When she talks about access to the airport, I mean, what I think I've just described is a very firm commitment that we should deliver a package as broad as that to support this. One of the recommendations of the Select Committee was to strengthen the wording about Western and Southern rail access. That has happened. We are very committed to both of those. I think it's a very broad-ranging package that will transform surface access to Heathrow.
Mr. Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and ask if he agrees that, as Heathrow is the UK's hub airport and this expansion of Heathrow will bring forward new routes, improved connectivity to Heathrow will bring important benefits to the people and economy of Yorkshire and other parts of the Northern Powerhouse?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. And what I'd say, of course, one of the disappointments we've seen recently has been the reduction in the number of flights from Leeds Bradford to Heathrow. I think creating more capacity at Heathrow will create greater competition, will allow new entrants to those regional markets, and will allow some of the routes that haven't been there in recent years to reappear.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It really does beg a belief that the words climate change didn't pass his mouth once during this statement. In his department's most recent aviation forecast, there is no scenario in which expansion at Heathrow is compatible with meeting the government's own commitments under the Climate Change Act to limit air passenger growth to 60% by 2050. And those same projections imply that if this runway is approved, aviation will take up over half of the UK's entire carbon budget by 2050, which is absurd. So can he explain that, given that the Committee on Climate Change has said don't use international offsetting, how on earth is this proposal compatible with our climate change objectives?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as you will know, this is an issue that the Airports Commission looked at very carefully. They formed a view that we could meet our climate change objectives and expand Heathrow Airport. Of course, the thing that's happening in the aviation sector is a transformation of the technology that means aircraft are much more fuel efficient, emit less as a result. And so technology is helping us move towards achieving the right approach.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and many in my constituency will benefit economically and directly from this expansion and are supportive of it. Does he also recognise that the issues around air quality and indeed pollution generally are not just confined to aircraft movements, but also to the entire traffic management in the area around Heathrow? And he'll be aware that parts of my constituency are seriously blighted, particularly Ivor, by the existence of Heathrow at present, and that if this development is to go ahead, there is going to have to be the necessary infrastructure investment to alleviate that.
Can I say I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend. He will be aware, of course, that we've had a number of toing and froings over the months about whether it would be necessary to build a depot at Langley. That clearly has now been resolved, and that depot is not now happening. That will simplify the process of delivering Western Rail access, that I hope will ease many of the pressures. One of the factors that will have an impact in his constituency, the large number of people who travel to work at Heathrow. One of the key benefits, I think, of Western Rail access, apart from deliver better connectivity to the West Country, is actually it makes it easier for staff to get the train to work.
Dr. Rupa Haque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It may be long overdue, but this is the wrong decision, and it flies in the face of what the Prime Minister's previously said, not to mention the last one with his no ifs, no buts, no third runway. So does this U-turn, like the abandoning of the feed-in tariff, like the embrace of Hinkley Point, show that this government's green dalliance and hugger-husky phase is now well and truly over?
Well, I mean, I'll just gently remind the Honourable Lady that I appreciate this is a difficult decision for communities and for Honourable and Right Honourable members who represent communities immediately around. You can't take a decision like this without having an impact. We will do everything we can to work with the airport to ensure that that impact is minimised. But when she talks about previous commitments, I'd just simply remind her that we fought a general election last year on a manifesto commitment to pursue this process through, and that's what we're doing.
Sir Hugo Swire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having discussed this for almost a decade, it'll be almost another decade before the first plane takes off on the new runway. So when the Secretary of State said time for action is now, it was hardly an overstatement. He is right to be able to claim this will benefit regional airports such as Exeter, in my constituency, Newquay, Bristol and others. But I would just suggest that rather than getting local authorities to come up with expansion plans, this should be the responsibility of the government if they want a fully integrated aviation system. And whilst Heathrow and Gatwick will certainly see more regional flights using them as a hub, that will of course raise the issue again of air passenger duty, and I would urge him to talk to the Chancellor of the Exchequer at an early opportunity to take this opportunity to revamp the whole APD issue as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on that latter point, I've no doubt the Chancellor will have heard what he said, and I'm sure he will not be alone in making that point in the run-up to the next budget. What I would say on the planning process, Mr. Speaker, is for smaller expansion projects, typically under 10 million passenger expansion, we think it is better that those decisions are taken locally. In full light of the impacts on local communities, both positive in terms of economic generation, but also the impacts of communities around. Where a project is bigger than that, we do think that we should continue to use the MPS process. We think that provides the right balance between ensuring that local decisions are taken about projects of an appropriate size, but this House also continues, if a future project is on a much more substantial scale, to play the part it does today.
Mrs Louise Ellman.
I welcome this statement and I support expansion at Heathrow. It's absolutely essential in the national interest for international connectivity. This plan is supported by Liverpool's John Lennon Airport. How can he guarantee that the promised link between the expanded Heathrow Airport and Liverpool will actually materialise?
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the Honourable Lady for that very clear statement of support. She has a very distinguished record in this area. She and I served on the Transport Committee when we were first elected. She is a very experienced person in the transport world, and I'm grateful to her for that support and for sharing my view of the strategic importance of this. In terms of protecting the right of access, Heathrow has made a number of specific commitments. Ultimately, it does require airlines to be able and willing to fly those routes, but my view is that the opening up of Heathrow to new carriers, some of the low-cost carriers that have done well elsewhere and that dominate the other airports, will actually ensure that those routes happen. What I have to do is to make sure two things. Firstly, that the slots are there for them to fly to, and secondly, in places where there is a social need but not an economic one, we continue to provide support through the public service obligation system.
Zach Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has mentioned already, he's emphasised the preparedness of Heathrow. But the truth is that we don't know how the third runway can be reconciled with air quality limits, air pollution limits. We don't know how the third runway can be reconciled with our climate change targets, as already been mentioned. We don't know how many communities are going to be newly brought under these new flight paths, how many hundreds of thousands of people will be affected. We don't know how many tens of billions of pounds of public money will be needed to facilitate access to and from Heathrow, and we don't even know how Heathrow is going to finance this project. What we do know, following a dramatic revision by government of the benefits in terms of economy and in terms of connectivity, that Heathrow is now on a par with Gatwick. So will my right honourable friend, can he understand why for so many people this doesn't just look like a blank cheque being given by this government to a foreign-owned multinational, it looks like a whole book of cheques signed by our constituents?
Mr. Speaker, I very much respect my honourable friend's view on this. He and I haven't shared the same view, but I very much respect the vigour in which he's argued the case that he's made, not just over the past few weeks, but over a long period of time. What I would say to him on the question of the economic value of Heathrow versus Gatwick, it is the case, as the documentation published today shows, as indeed it has already shown, that once you get past the 2060s, the economic case for Gatwick catches up and overtakes that for Heathrow. Between now and then, the economic case for expanding Heathrow is stronger. And of course, what it doesn't do, and we've used the methodology that the Airports Commission chose to use, what that doesn't do is factor in the very significant strategic importance of freight at Heathrow, which is not counted. It is the biggest port by value in the United Kingdom, and this will also deliver a huge economic benefit to the UK.
Mr Gibbon-Jones.
I welcome today's statement and support the expansion at Heathrow. Newcastle International Airport is vital for the North East economy. Now, the Secretary of State has already mentioned that the support in the regions for Heathrow expansion because of connectivity from airports such as Newcastle. Can I just kindly suggest to him that before the actual vote, he actually publishes the exact detail of how those slots can be maintained? Because a lot of that support is conditional on getting those additional slots.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm very happy to provide any further information that honourable members like. I'm very grateful to him for the support he's indicated today. In fact, as he will remember, when we first announced our provisional decision last year, made my first visit to Newcastle Airport. It is a very good airport. The leadership there told me very clearly how this project would help them develop not only their business but the economy of the North East. And I will certainly look to provide extra information. What I would say is that some of the detail of this comes further in the process. At the moment, the advice I have is that we are probably best to use the public service obligation requirements to guarantee those slots are available. Of course, it has to be the case that an airline is willing to fly them, but as I said a moment ago, in a more competitive market where new entrants are able to come into the market, as they do all around the United Kingdom, but don't into Heathrow, we will see routes appear that should have been there a long time ago, aren't now, and will be in the future.
Sir Paul Beresford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend. I completely support what has been a very, very long time coming decision. There will be efforts to try to delay, and in fact he mentioned the possibility of judicial reviews. What assurance can he give me that he and the government are going to be absolutely behind this to overcome these hurdles and make sure that we meet the programme, because the European airports aren't waiting, and we do not want to lose the opportunity that this will give us.
Speaker, can I say that first of all we've taken very careful legal advice as we've been through an exhaustive process, and I should pay tribute to my team at the Department for Transport who've done a fantastic job of assembling a vast amount of material for this House to study before the vote and to demonstrate the case that we're making today. It is absolutely essential that we can, if we are challenged in the courts, that we demonstrate we can make that case. But of course, this is a matter for our elected Parliament. This House will be deciding whether I should designate the national policy statement. And it's very much my hope that that will carry weight as we go through the rest of the process.
I know, don't worry.
Chiomura.
Thank you. Such a significant expansion in aviation capacity raises major environmental and ethical concerns. But given the recommendations of the Transport Select Committee, I believe this is the right option, providing it delivers for regional economic growth. Mr Speaker, businesses and residents in Newcastle deserve just as much access to direct flights as those in the south, but given network economics make that impossible, what additional capacity will he guarantee for Newcastle Airport, and for how long, regardless of how he makes that work?
The important thing to say, Mr Speaker, is that the reservation of slots for our regional airports is not a time-limited thing. It's a permanent feature. This is not something that we would countenance putting in place a legal mechanism that could be eroded away over time. That is what's happened in recent times, that regional connections to Heathrow have diminished in numbers, that regional routes have been replaced by long-haul routes. I give an absolute categorical assurance to the House that the legal mechanism we put in place will prevent that from happening again.
I don't mind, take my
George Freeman.
As long as...
I thank and congratulate ministers on finally making a tough decision.
that puts the national interest, prosperity and business confidence ahead of politics, an approach I hope will apply in our other big decisions. Could I echo my right honourable friend, the former Secretary of State, on the importance of cost control? And does the Secretary of State agree with me that the Heathrow hub proposal, which extends over the M25, is cheaper, quieter, quicker and less environmentally damaging, has much to commend it, both at Heathrow, where it was rejected by shareholders who perversely make more money the more expensive the scheme, but also at other airports around the country? And would he encourage that proposal in those other airports?
Mr. Speaker, clearly there was a lot of innovation went into the Heathrow hub proposal. We did consider it very carefully when we reached our initial recommendation. There were a number of drawbacks to it. One example, for example, Mr. Speaker, is it leaves much less respite for people around the airport by operating in the way it proposed. But I've no doubt that its promoters, who are smart people and have developed some innovative ideas, will be using those ideas to encourage change in other places, hopefully around the world as well, and building an international business for themselves.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, at last, after years wasted because of the coalition government, we now at last have a government taking a grip on this issue, a decision that should have been taken years ago. And my constituents in East London and in people in Essex and Kent, with Crossrail coming, will greatly benefit from this. So I welcome the decision, but can he reassure me that there will be no further delays because of divisions in his cabinet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for that very resounding statement of support. I'm very grateful to him. This matter was discussed at the Cabinet this morning. The Airport Subcommittee met earlier this morning and reached its view. The Cabinet was informed about that, and I can say that the Cabinet gave almost entirely universal support for it.
Crispin Blunt.
Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, particularly outlining the 5 new rail lines that would support Heathrow expansion, and contrast that with no proposals to support any proposal at Gatwick for any new rail capacity down the busiest commuter line in the country, where he's only too well aware of the problems that line has today. The opposition spokesman gave a masterclass in how to avoid making a decision if one is in that political position. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that if we are to discharge our duty to future generations, having analysed and consulted on this proposal to death, now is the time to make a decision?
Well, Mr. Speaker, now is definitely the time to take a decision. I absolutely agree with him that transport links to Gatwick need to improve as well. That's why Gatwick Station is one of the projects that we're working with the airport on at the moment. But I'm grateful to him for his support.
Phil Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The North East is a global-facing region, and links to an international hub are critical and essential for the economy of the North East. For Durham Tees Valley Airport in my constituency and for Newcastle Airport, a third runway at Heathrow, I believe, is a strategic necessity and essential. However, the Secretary of State says that 15% of slots would be domestic connections. How can he guarantee this? Will domestic slots be ring-fenced, and what will the implications be for Durham Tees Valley?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, Durham Tees Valley is one of the airports that has been identified by Heathrow as a potential beneficiary of the expansion. I am very clear that there will be legally binding mechanisms in place to reserve those slots for regional airports. That is part of the core rationale for doing this. Without that, I think this project would have much less credibility, and I have every intention of making sure we deliver those protections for our regions.
Robert Goodwell.
Not before time, this is great news for UK PLC, but also for regional airports like Leeds Bradford, who've too long been hampered by the lack of slots into our major hub airport, and their customers, who have had to then play into the hands of our competitors by connecting in places like Schiphol or Charles de Gaulle. I read in the newspapers there may be some barriers put to actual construction. So in that regard, could I offer my services as somebody with some experience driving bulldozers?
Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to Heathrow Airport this afternoon and get them to send him a job application. Whether the project will be using some of the heavy equipment he has at his disposal is a different question.
Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, polling in the past has suggested my constituents are in balance, in principle, in favour of expansion at Heathrow due to the support that gives to SMEs and employment dependent on Heathrow. But they are rightly concerned about noise, pollution, congestion, respite, night flights, those issues that have been discussed today, and on the basis of past performance, confidence in Heathrow is not high. A significant issue is the flight pass. Will the Secretary of State ensure the publication of any proposed new flight pass as soon as possible? Because surely that information should be available to members of Parliament before we vote. And will he also confirm the criteria on which he will assess Southern Rail access will also look at regeneration benefits, in addition to access from Surrey and from Waterloo?
Well, on that latter point, my view is that we need to just make this project happen, Southern Rail access. That's why we're looking to get the private sector to do it. It's my view that it is a project that can be delivered by the private sector, and indeed we have private consortia interested in doing so. With regard to flight paths, it is actually necessary to now work off the back of Heathrow's initial design work to look at what the requirements are for flight paths. You have to set out the exact geography of airports and then map around them what you will need. That's the process that would happen. There is a major reorganisation of our airspace happening in the early 2020s, which would have to happen anyway, and this proposal will bed into that.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, Manchester Airport is a key transport hub. It handles almost 28 million passengers a year and drives the economic progress of the Northern Powerhouse. How will my right honourable friend Secretary of State ensure that the North feels the benefit of this announcement?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Manchester, of course, will be in a very interesting position because it will be connected to Heathrow by air and by high-speed rail and vice versa. And I think that the linkage between the two airports will become a really strong strategic benefit for the United Kingdom. I expect Manchester to see more flights to Heathrow, but I expect more trains linking the two to provide a real interchange between Britain's two most substantial airports.
Mr. Richard Burden.
Secretary of State, though, that connecting the regions and nations of this country to opportunities and markets abroad has got to be about more than how much they can have routes through a national hub in the South East, however important that national hub is. Would he agree with me that places like Birmingham, Manchester, Edinburgh, East Midlands for freight are international gateways in their own right, not simply regional airports as he described them? And whilst every minister that I've spoken to about this has said they want to support the UK, all the UK's international gateways, very few have ever said what they're actually going to do to make that a reality, to utilise the existing capacity that's there and to make sure that the potential of those airports grow in the time it takes, a decade or more, to build this new runway, if indeed it happens. So what is he going to do about that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a thriving aviation sector. I'm actually not sure regional airports need ministerial help to grow because they're doing a pretty good job already. Every regional airport I go to surprises now by the range of international destinations it has, and most recently Cardiff Airport launched a route to Qatar. We've seen a whole variety of different European, international, transatlantic routes developed at our regional airports. I expect that to continue. But the reality is, for some of the most strategically important routes of the future, actually there is not enough for a market in an individual regional area to justify a route being launched. And the purpose of a hub airport is to effectively assemble a market to justify that route and strengthen the whole United Kingdom.
Mr. David Jones.
May I also congratulate my right honourable friend on his statement today. And given that Heathrow is the United Kingdom's biggest port by value for exports outside the European Union, Does he agree that its expansion will be crucially important to British businesses from all over the country in the post-Brexit world?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is going to be very important about this project, Mr. Speaker, is that Heathrow is planning to source service, product, manufacturing from all around the United Kingdom. As indeed the honourable gentleman from the SNP said earlier, we want to see this as a project that doesn't just create connections for the whole United Kingdom, but creates opportunities for business all around the United Kingdom.
Vera Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, why is he so much in support of the unpopular expansion of Heathrow Airport when airports like Bristol are looking to expand, which would make much more environmental and economic sense to my constituents in Bath and people across the southwest? And as the honourable member for Birmingham North Fields has pointed out, they are international airports in their own right. Why the obsession with London airports?
Mr. Speaker, it's neither one nor the other. Bristol Airport's done a fantastic job in building up an international network. It serves, I think, more than 100 destinations now. It is a great airport, it's a great success story. But that doesn't remove the need for a hub airport to be able to deliver strategic connections that only really operate from a single centre, where you have to assemble the market from a number of distant destinations within the United Kingdom and indeed internationally to make those routes viable.
Henry Smith.
I acknowledge the Heathrow runway expansion decision, and indeed I very much welcome a decision finally having been made. Can I seek assurances that it won't detract from the very necessary investment, infrastructure investment in Gatwick Airport, particularly, as my right honourable friend, the member for Reigate, has said, importance in investing in upgrading the rail station and indeed rail capacity to Gatwick?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my friend is absolutely right. And indeed, as he mentioned yesterday, we have shortly coming up 2 important bits of engineering work that I hope will increase the reliability of that railway line, which is already seeing a big increase in capacity. Gatwick Station also needs to be addressed. And of course, the proposals I've announced today around local decisions on smaller expansions will allow airports around the country to enter into dialogue with our local authorities about their future without all these decisions having to be taken at a national level.
Angela Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, and indeed when the expansion proposal comes before the House in the next few days, I will be supporting it. Not least because it's in the national interest, but also because Heathrow is committed to a robust UK supply chain built on 4 construction hubs which will be situated throughout the country. So will the Secretary of State commit to supporting that supply chain in every way necessary to ensure that the jobs created by expansion benefit my constituents as well as constituents in the South East?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the key benefits of this is a multi-billion-pound project that will serve the entire United Kingdom. It will create thousands of jobs, thousands of new apprenticeships in both the airport plan itself, but also in the supply chain that supports it. And that supply chain will be all around the United Kingdom, and it will create jobs and opportunities for a new generation, not in the year of engineering, Mr. Speaker, a new generation of engineers.
Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the Transport Select Committee, may I thank my right honourable friend for accepting our recommendations. And also as the champion of the Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge corridor, I was heartened by his proposals to link the Chiltern line into Heathrow. Can I urge him to bring forward those plans as soon as possible, because that connectivity will help realise the government's wider ambitions for Britain's brain belt?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend on that latter point. I am working with HS2 to make sure we have provision made in the development of Old Oak Common for those Chiltern Line platforms to be put in. The Oxford-Cambridge corridor is a crucial one for the development of our economy. It will need connections into our premier hub. This is the best way, in my view, of achieving it.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Speaker. This is not even a robust plan for London, and it damages and stunts regional airports. The Secretary of State has given no details of flight paths, has no coherent plans for air quality, surface access, jobs or controlling public subsidy. The Secretary of State is well known for his reverse Midas touch, but on this issue, shouldn't he listen to his right honourable friend, the member for Putney, who said this morning that we need a UK-wide airport strategy and not this expensive and incompetent botched job?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the honourable gentleman has a particular view on this proposal. I didn't expect to find him supportive of it. What I would say to him is that we will work very hard to ensure that the areas that are affected by expansion are treated as decently as possible and are supported by what will be a world-leading package of community support that I hope will mitigate the impact of what is otherwise a nationally strategically important project.
Julian Knight. I support the statement that's been made and the careful consultative approach of the Secretary of State. Currently, though, Birmingham Airport, on the borders of my constituency, runs well under capacity, about 30 to 40%. Does the Secretary of State believe this announcement will improve this situation over the time, and how?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is capacity at a number of our regional airports. They continue to grow. Birmingham Airport it will continue to grow. There is no doubt that the location of Birmingham Airport will, if we expand Heathrow Airport, mean that it faces a greater competitive pressure than many of our other airports. But I do not believe that means that Birmingham Airport will cease to be a success story. It is already a great asset to the West Midlands. It will continue to be so. It has attracted a number of important international routes in recent times. I have no doubt those will continue.
Ian Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For all the talk of balanced economic growth and boosting the regions, it's the same old story with the bulk of the investment, the spending, the jobs and the benefits, always all in London and the South East. Why could they not have shown a bit more imagination and expanded Birmingham Airport, got behind the regions? Birmingham Airport, actually the best connected airport in the country, on the motorway network, and with HS2, it would be quicker. If they'd taken it through Heathrow, it would be quicker to get from Heathrow to Birmingham than it is to get from Paddington to Heathrow now. And it would mean that we get our fair share of the jobs and the investment and the benefits in the Midlands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I be clear that I expect the benefits and the jobs from this to be all around the country, including the West Midlands. And the reality is that Birmingham Airport, which is a very good airport, will, I have no doubt, continue to attract passengers, to attract routes, and to be a success story for the West Midlands. That's the way it should be. There are particular reasons why the United Kingdom, I think, needs to build on its principal strategic airport hub. But that will not prevent other airports from growing, and the measures I'm announcing today will, I hope, enable them to do so.
Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Secretary of State's announcement today, a long overdue decision to expand our national hub airport in the national interest. And can I assure him that this announcement will be warmly welcome across the South West and particularly in Cornwall. And can I also thank him for a specific reference to Newquay Airport and his commitment to make sure that slots are available for regional airports. In that vein, does he agree with me that a direct link from Newquay to Heathrow would offer up huge opportunities for greater exports from Cornwall and inward investment into Cornwall? And can I ask him for his support to ensure that we can achieve this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Newquay is, I think, one of the principal beneficiaries for the future of expansion. I think there's a real opportunity to increase air links to a part of the country that is quite distant in existing transport terms. I am very strongly of the view, as is he, that Newquay has the potential to really flourish with Heathrow expansion, and I will happily work with him to do everything we can to make sure that's what happens.
Gavin Shuker.
Mr. Speaker, given that this project will likely span multiple parliaments and certainly successive administrations, does he agree that it's frankly incredible for parties of government not to have a clear position on this proposal when it comes to be voted on in Parliament? Can he therefore confirm the whipping arrangements for his own party and suggest to me any mechanisms that might allow, say, some individuals to take a different view but also maintain collective responsibility?
Mr. Speaker, I think my view is it's for each party to decide its own whipping arrangements. I've no doubt that's what will happen. My expectation in timetable terms is that we will reach the DCO process, the completion of the DCO process later in this Parliament. I hope that we can get going early in the 2020s on building this runway if this House gives its consent over the next couple of weeks. And I hope that all parties that aspire to govern this country in the post-Brexit world will unite behind a proposal I believe is of actually vital strategic importance to us.
And Mr. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Secretary of State on at last moving this issue on? Does he agree with me that the delays caused by successive governments on this issue have caused the UK to lose a lot of business? For example, Dublin is already getting on with expanding its airport. So can I ask him, I know there are restrictions, I know there are difficulties, but can I ask him so that we do not continue to lose air business in this country, to move this situation, this issue on as quickly as possible?
Give my old friend that absolute assurance. My view is the same as I think many other members of this House, that this decision should have been taken a long time ago. But we are at least taking it now, and I want to get on with the job.
And Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, Transport for London have estimated that it will cost around £20 billion in investment alone to link the third runway to London. Will his department be designating that as UK spend or England-only spend? And if he can't answer that question now, will he make sure that the government officially outlines its position before we're expected to vote?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, I don't recognise this figure. We have an already well-designed plan to deliver a transformation of surface access to Heathrow, some privately funded, some already in the pipeline of investment like Crossrail and like HS2, all of which are reflected in the settlements that exist across the United Kingdom for capital spending.
Ben Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome this statement from my right honourable friend and ask if he agrees with me that the chance to promote skills in construction and engineering out in the regions, and particularly I hope at a manufacturing hub near my Mansfield constituency, is a massive chance to both provide the kinds of jobs that my constituents are crying out for, high-quality jobs, but also in areas like that, to raise aspiration and increase social mobility out across the rest of England as well.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and again, this is the year of engineering, and projects like the expansion of Heathrow, like HS2, have the ability to provide opportunity and excitement for a whole new generation of engineers that we are going to need, Mr. Speaker, if we are to have a successful economy in the future. And so this project is much more than a transport project. It's about skills development and job opportunity development for the whole United Kingdom.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Londoners already face unacceptable levels of air and noise pollution, especially for those who live under the Heathrow flight paths like my constituents do. And this is not to mention the grave risks we all face from climate change. So I ask the Secretary of State again, why doesn't he think noise and air pollution and climate change are not important enough issues to actually influence government policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've considered these issues very carefully. As I said, we've considered the issue of noise, air quality, climate change. That's why we commissioned the Airports Commission to do the very detailed work it has. It's why we've worked to update that work so the House has all the information it needs in front of it. But of course, the other thing we have to take into account is the potential for our economy, and that's why I'm very, very grateful. Perhaps sometimes unusually grateful to the trade union movement, to Len McCluskey, for example, of Unite, who I know she knows well, who this morning has again expressed his support for this project, and I'm grateful to him for that.
And John Howe.
Mr. Speaker, the airspace review is a crucial part of the success of this project, and together they can help limit stacking. Can you say something about how these reviews dovetail?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Civil Aviation Authority and NATS have already begun work on airspace changes, on consultation on airspace changes. This is of vital importance because it can have two big effects. Firstly, it makes the management of our airspace possible going forwards, which is extremely congested at the moment. There are conflicts between airports. It needs to be modernised. It needs to use new technology. But it also enables the management of aircraft as they come into the United Kingdom's airspace to be changed in a way that can substantially change stacking. And so that's a huge benefit as well. The arrival of the third runway proposal into that does not change the need for reform. It simply adapts that reform to fit the more detailed design as it emerges.
Mr. Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's decision. He mentioned in his statement local employment and apprenticeships. What does his department's assessment show as the increase in employment at Heathrow, both during the construction phase and in the long term?
Speaker, the estimates on this fluctuate somewhat, but essentially we're talking about the high tens of thousands of additional jobs, around 100,000 extra jobs created from this. It obviously depends how you measure them and how you estimate them and the rate of expansion of the airport, but it should create in the region of 100,000 extra jobs.
Justin Tomlinson.
Speaker, there is very strong support from both Swindon businesses and Swindon residents, in particular hard-working families looking to book future holidays. Can I also stress the importance of the Western Rail link, as this would give direct access to Heathrow for my residents in under 1 hour?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Its importance is for connections to places like Swindon, Bristol, the South West, South Wales, but also, as I mentioned earlier, just providing better opportunity for staff who live more locally to get to work on the train. So absolutely accept the importance of the project. It is one of the projects that's in our investment plans for the next control period on the railways. My expectation is we'll be open in good time for the runway.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will know from my questions on the Transport Select Committee that I wanted his department and Heathrow to do much more about getting people to the airport by public transport in a 2-runway world, let alone a 3-runway world. We need to see the money, not just hear the soundbite. So can the Secretary of State assure us that the Western Rail access is now fully funded, and can he tell us how much of that will be contributed by Heathrow?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is fully funded, and we intend to extract as much money as possible from Heathrow for all the improvements. They need to make a substantial contribution to this, but this is a project that will be delivered.
Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I warmly welcome this comprehensive statement. Can I pick up one of the points my right honourable friend made regarding freight transportation? I think this was actually omitted from the otherwise excellent Davis Commission. Can he confirm that and that adding in freight transport significantly increases the economic value of Heathrow?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I mean, this is one of the things that I was surprised wasn't taken into account, but the Davis Commission did not factor in, they did not seek to monetise the freight potential of an expanded Heathrow in their findings. We have carefully followed the same methodology they used because we judged it to be wrong to change methodology midstream. But the reality is the numbers don't include freight. Heathrow is our biggest freight airport by value, our biggest freight port by value. It is absolutely central to the economy of many parts of the United Kingdom, from the north of Scotland, where smoked salmon products are shipped via Heathrow internationally, to more local businesses in the London area. He is absolutely right that freight is a crucial part of this decision.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I very warmly welcome this statement, then be clear that expanding Heathrow is not just about London, it's about Torbay. Businesses getting out to markets and literally seafood shipped out to China every day through its port. Yeah. Will he reassure me that we'll now actually get on with this and we'll very quickly have the votes on the floor of this House to show just what support this plan has?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is most definitely yes. We actually have to, as a result of the statutory process, get on with the vote to happen shortly. Clearly, the business managers will announce the detailed dates of business, but I do want to get on with it as well.
Andrew Bowie.
Much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the businesses and people of the North East of Scotland, can I thank the Secretary of State for his announcement today. The UK oil and gas sector, other sectors and indeed economic growth in my part of the world are reliant on numerous slots to the South East and beyond, so thank you. But would he confirm, to put beyond any doubt, that this decision today will mean a growth in connectivity for Scotland and for Aberdeen in particular?
Absolutely. Mr. Speaker, Aberdeen and the oil industry is clearly one of the potential beneficiaries from all of this, because the oil industry is to be found in disparate parts of the world. We have enormous expertise in Aberdeen. The routes that people in the oil industry need to take are not necessarily ones that would automatically be served by a regional airport. And that's why a better hub airport with more international connections is a particular benefit to industries such as his in Aberdeen.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to get through your stacking system ahead of Air Corby there. Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State? As a member of the Transport Select Committee, it's an absolute delight to see the Select Committee cross-party in collaboration with government. I think this is the best of it. And could the Secretary of State confirm that, of course, Recommendation 22, which relates to the Lakeside Energy from Waste plant, of course, there's still the commercial opportunity for a more up-to-date waste management capability to be purchased, and that, of course, is the only recommendation that's not being followed by government.
Mr. Speaker, I should say I had a lot of sympathy with what the Select Committee was saying, but the truth is that the reason we didn't accept this particular recommendation is that this is not an asset that is categorised as strategically important for the United Kingdom. There are clearly discussions taking place already between the airport and the owners about what should happen to that plant. Had it been of strategic importance, we would absolutely have accepted their recommendation. But the truth is it isn't, and therefore it really is a matter for the different organisations involved.
It's on first glove.
Mr. Speaker, it's always good to get through at last call. What difference does my right honourable friend think that this decision will make in terms of our international trading prospects, but also on UK steel supply chains, for example? And can I also tell him that we certainly, in Corby, want one of these new construction hubs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on that latter point, I suspect there's going to be quite a lot of competition for those, and I've no doubt that Corby will do a great job in attracting business from this project. I think the particular importance of this project, Mr. Speaker, and on an issue he and I share very much over the events of the last few years. We are shortly going to be entering the post-Brexit world. If we are going to demonstrate as a country that we are going to remain an outward-focused, internationally focused trading nation, then a project like this is of vital strategic importance to us. And I hope whatever anyone's view may be about the Brexit process, everyone in this House will accept we are much better off demonstrating to the world that we want to be connected and involved and trading post-Brexit. And I hope that, as a result of that, people across this House will get behind this proposal, make sure that it carries when it comes to a vote, and send a powerful message to the world that Britain is in business.
Thank you. If the point of order relates to that which we've just been discussing, I'm happy to take it now. I think it does. Yes. Point of order, Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The statement omitted to mention when the actual national policy statement debate will be. That's important because, of course, members will want to table written questions in order to find out more about the copious documents that have been published, and I'm concerned that there is not much time to do name-day written questions and receive answers in time for the debate. What would his advice be in relation to that?
Well, my advice in the first instance is to see here and now whether the Secretary of State can provide any illumination on that matter, and depending on what he says, I might have further advice for the Right Honourable Lady. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the formal process in statute is that the vote has to take place within 21 sitting days of my tabling of the MPS, which took place this morning. So the vote has to take place within 21 sitting days of now. The exact date will be a matter for the business managers, but we will want to ensure that members have sufficient time to look at the material that has been tabled today. And in the case of written questions, I will make sure my department expedites responses to issues raised by members so they have time to study them in good time before the vote.
Thank you. Grateful to the Secretary of State for that response to the Right Honourable Lady's point of order, and flowing from it, my perhaps unsurprising advice to the Right Honourable Lady is that she should press ahead with her tabling of questions with dispatch, and in light of the commitment the Secretary of State has given, I think it is to be expected that colleagues interested in this matter and the Chair will keenly attend to the speed and comprehensiveness with which ministerial replies to those effectively urgent questions are provided. If there are no further points of order appertaining to this matter, I'm most grateful to the Secretary of State and to colleagues